Now, I give the moderation to our Mr. Sport Lord, George Folks, and we will start now the second session, which we hope it could help us to identify effective responses. And George, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. It's very obvious that it's quite a long time since I took part physically in any sport. But can I first of all...
A lot of our report has your name.
Thank you. Can I first of all ask you all to thank Emily for the very efficient and sympathetic way that she moderated the first session. Thank you very much. I only hope I can do half as well. And can I start off by saying some people, I don't know if other members of the committee have found this, some people have said to me, what's this got to do with the Council of Europe? Why are you getting yourself involved in this? Well, if this is not our main aims are human rights, democracy and the rule of law. If this is not democracy and above all human rights, I don't know what is. This is human rights right in the center of things. Now, I was going to start off by saying that in the first session we dealt with the identifying the problems, the situation, the current state of play, and that we would now move on to looking at ways forward and to move on to look at some kind of solutions. But we've already started looking at solutions. So what we'll do now is take it a bit further and ask each of the speakers, and one or two of our new speakers as well, but some of the ones have already spoken, just to follow up what they said earlier. And I'd like to start with Olivia. Olivia, you were introduced very effectively by Emily, so I won't say any more about it, except to ask you a question. You've given us some solutions. On the basis that we're not able to do everything immediately, and already Amanda suggested a timetable, which I thought was a very interesting suggestion. What are your first 2 or 3 priorities? What do you think we could do? What would you want us to ask our governments to do? Because that's what we can do. We can pass a resolution here. We can get the Council Committee of Ministers to agree it. But what do you want each of us to say to our national government, to our sports associations, our sports authorities rather, and also what would you say that we could do to involve what you describe as victims in this? How can we involve it? As Patrice said, we've got no young people here. How can we involve them? Could you deal with that, Olivia?
Sure. So, first and foremost, obviously, developing a comprehensive legislation, government should develop and enact comprehensive legislation specifically addressing safe sport. The legislation should define and criminalize different forms of abuse, establish reporting mechanisms, and outline consequences for perpetrators. It should also provide provisions for prevention, education, and victim support services. Now, the victim support services is we need to get trauma-informed people involved. We need to get people involved who have been down this road. What better psychologist than a person like Patrice or myself, who have been there, done that, got the T-shirt, and somehow on the other side come through it, and involve us. We are sitting here today because we are strong enough to be involved. We can provide funding, education and prevention programs, but funding of those programs is a huge challenge. In South Africa, where I am, funding is a massive challenge for me. And to put out the awareness, I use media. I cannot always depend on media to put the awareness out there. And sometimes it's very, very warped in terms of what goes out there. But my biggest cases that I've got, and I've recently just got a conviction of one man who had 740 counts of abuse against him, which he racked up in a space of 6 months. He was convicted on all 740 cases. It was hardly reported on. So we need to use the media as much as we can. Funding for organizations like myself and Patrice. Without the funding, we cannot get resources to help us do the work that we do. And then obviously to be able to work with all the various organizations. Collaboration is a huge, huge, huge thing. And we need to all be involved with each other in some way. I've got situations where I've got victims of a South African coach in Europe. I have no clue who in Europe I can contact to assist me. So it's all about networking, collaboration, and then top of the list, can't remember if I've said this or not, is safe reporting structures. Victims need to know that when they report, their report is going to be actioned and not just said, we're on it and put onto the back burner. And that is because, that mostly happens because I do believe that the people that are in positions of safeguarding officers and are in positions to take a report don't really know what to do with the information. I hope that answers your question.
George, can I come back because you say like 3?
I'm just going to ask you the question.
The same question.
Yeah, Patrice he didn't need any introduction from anyone before, and certainly doesn't need it now. I was going to ask you the same question, exactly. How do we involve, but also, you said we got together to get rid of the Super League, but that was because it was in our self-interest, in UEFA and FIFA, to get rid of the Super League. And so there was a combination of vested interest that got rid of another group of vested interests. How do we get things organized? How do we mobilize? You said there are powerful people here, but each person here has access to more powerful people back in their governments. But what can we do?
I keep repeating the same, and it's really simple. It's to prioritize it, to put it on your agenda. That's the first things we have to do. And also to raise more awareness, because people are not aware of it, or maybe they pretend to don't see it. So this is, for me, like really fundamental. We don't need to go and talking about strategy or technique. Just prioritize it in your agenda. This is like the first challenge. And when Olivia say, the media are so powerful, and I know you say you get rid of the Super League or whatever, but why we don't do the same for ending the violence against children? I know this won't happen in 1-2 days. It will maybe take 10, 15 years, but we are already late. We are already too late. That's why I said those kind of meetings should be happen like 10 years ago, but whatever, it happened now. And let's sure we are not here just to have a good time and listen to conversation. We have to go back. And like I say, it's many powerful people here. Just prioritize it on your agenda. That's the only things I ask first. Then also we will deal with other things.
Absolutely right. Can I say, compare it with poverty? We've known that there are real problems about poor people, and it's getting worse in most countries rather than getting better. Here, Marcus Rashford identified a particular issue of free school meals. And because he took it up and was a figurehead on it, the government had to take action. Can you see yourself being the international Marcus Rashford on this particular issue? And you're already doing that. Can you do more?
Of course, I think every day of my life, I want to do more. And today, like I say, been really successful and win so many trophies. But to be here, talking about this matter, this is more important than any trophy I win in my life. And again, I want to go back to the Marcus Rashford case. When Marcus Rashford did that, what's the football fan say? You should score in goal. You're not like the Obama of England. To tell you, because they are not open-minded, because fans will always tell you to focus on your job, run, defend, and score goal. But myself, if I am here today, it's not like for having a good time. No. It's because I dedicate my life to that now. This is what makes me happy. You know, on my platform, when I do some crazy video and I've got some comment, someone say, Patrice, my dad just passed away, but watching one of your videos make me smile. But this is more important than winning the Champions League. That's why my heart is. I finish my coach license. I can go back to football. So Alex Ferguson called me every day, come back to Manchester, and say no. Because now making people happy and make people safe, that's what makes me more happy. And trust me, I've got the energy. Don't worry about that.
Thank you very much, Patrice. We've got some media present. I hope they pick up the fact that Patrice said that if he makes an impact on this, he'll consider it more important than winning the Champions League. That is a that is a fantastic.
That's the truth.
That's a fantastic commitment. Thank you very much, Patrice. Now, I was going to say we come down to earth, but we come down to the reality of fulfilling it. Someone who hasn't yet spoken, but who we've had as our guest in the Council of Europe on a number of occasions. Alice de Bell is Deputy Secretary of FIFA. He is Gianni Infantino's right-hand man and has a big influence on what happens at FIFA, and I think a very good influence, and we need a good influence there. We've heard from Joyce earlier on the excellent work that FIFA have been promoting and have been sponsoring Joyce to do regarding the setting up of an international safe sports entity. Perhaps, Alistair, you included in your words, or you can say obviously anything else as well, can you bring us up to date on this, how far it's going, what progress has been made, but also I think you've been experiencing some difficulties. Some of the people who are maybe not as enthusiastic about it as FIFA are. So it's my great pleasure to welcome. The fact that he's also a Scottish solicitor makes him an even better person.
Thank you, George. I'm not sure if everyone will agree with that. But anyway, no, thank you very much, and thanks also to the Council of Europe for this invitation to participate in what we at FIFA consider to be a very important meeting and policy discussion. Perhaps if I could just try to contextualize this a little bit. I mean, we see sport obviously as a global phenomenon and a global activity. And unfortunately, we see child abuse and incidents of this nature also as a global phenomenon as well. It's something which appears to affect many, many sports. We've seen the cases in gymnastics or tennis or swimming or football. It seems to be everywhere. We're here in the Council of Europe, which I think is 46 or 47 member states, so bigger than the
46.
The European Union. But we're talking about something global in nature. And we also have to understand, I think, that national sports federations or even some international federations have limited capacity and limited resource to be able to deal with this issue. And so it's not really going to go away based on the resources that they have. It seems to me, and it seems to FIFA, that given the nature of the problem, given its international dimension and character, that it's an area where a pooling of knowledge, a pooling of resource, a pooling of experience would be a logical step. And I think, as many other people have mentioned, it needs to be done in coordination with civil society and in particular state law enforcement. We're talking about areas which are, you know, you cross the boundary from sporting or unethical behavior to criminality. And sports governing bodies are not equipped to deal with cases of criminality, but they do have a lot of relevant experience to contribute and to bring to the resolution of these issues. So therefore, some kind of multilateral framework involving all sports and involving state law enforcement seems to be a structure which we think is worth pursuing. I think whatever composition that entity takes, it also needs to have an independent character. I think this is a recurrent theme that we've heard, because victims need to have confidence in the institution that would handle these complaints. they don't or have not historically, and perhaps for legitimate reasons, had confidence in the sports bodies in their traditional structures. So I think we need something new. And another recurrent theme here, and something mentioned repeatedly by Patrice Evra, is the need to prioritize the matter. We think the establishment of a new body tasked with dealing with this in an effective international manner would be an indication of the degree of importance and seriousness and priority that international sport attaches to it. I'd say it's something that we need to work on together with politicians such as yourselves. We also need to understand that sports bodies need that encouragement and they need that pressure. I mean, one of the, I think it was the lady from Wales, made the question, or asked a very relevant question, which is who holds sports bodies to account? Well, in this specific area, not many people is the truth. What historically happened at FIFA, who held FIFA to account about 8 years ago, was the US Justice Department. The organization would not have changed had it not been for the intervention of the DOJ in 2015. FIFA would not have self-policed or self-governed its way to reform, in my opinion. The fact that the organization is a different one today is a result of the intervention of law enforcement. Now, failure to deal with issues of child abuse and exploitation, I don't think will result in intervention from state law enforcement, but it is beholden, I think, to FIFA working together with other sports to take this issue seriously if they are to be considered as responsible governing bodies. That's why we engaged and set up this consultation process. It happened, I think, immediately after we had 2 extremely challenging cases in Afghanistan and in Haiti, basically lawless societies where it is practically impossible or very, very challenging to deal with these matters. And it was after these cases that the FIFA president met with the UN Agency on Drugs and Crime and mooted the idea of setting up an international, independent, safe sport entity. We realized there would be challenges with it. We realized there are challenges with the status quo. If there's one thing that seems to be common ground here, is that the current system is not very satisfactory. One gentleman asked the question earlier about what works, and I personally didn't really hear a very clear answer to that. So we need to think about something new. We need to think about something structural, independent, with government, with state law enforcement to really take this issue seriously, I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thanks for answering Kim's question earlier on as well. You'll have the opportunity of asking Alistair some questions later, and I'm sure there will be some. But let's move on now to another sport, ice hockey. And we're very privileged to have with us the Deputy Secretary of the International Ice Hockey Federation. And Ashley, you had an Integrity Awareness Week, I think, in December last year. Can you tell us, first of all, or include in it, in what you're going to say, what happened, how effective that was, and also what the position is in ice hockey in relation to this issue in general? Ashley.
First, I'd like to reiterate what everyone has said and thank everyone for this opportunity to speak. The IHF feels this is an extremely important topic, so we welcome any discussions and collaboration between any parties that are willing to come to the table. So the IHF, before I indicate or explain whether we feel our Integrity Awareness Raising Week was effective, I think it's first important to start with why we did it. Within ice hockey, there is an extreme power imbalance within our teams. A coach and a GM rules all. Players have no say, and it is the coach that decides who plays on the ice, who goes to our World Championships, and who plays in the Olympics. That power imbalance is very evident. We have a very toxic culture within ice hockey. Coaches want to win at all costs, and they do not care about the human rights of their players. What the IHF wanted to do with this Integrity Awareness Raising Week is to let people within our ecosystem know that the IHF will not stand for this behavior, and we will step in to stop it. What we used was integrity ambassadors. So we went to people who have suffered crimes, who have been victims of abuse and harassment, who have been victims of other integrity issues, to be our voice in our Integrity Awareness Raising Week. What we learned and what we came out of this Integrity Awareness Week, it was effective. But it was effective in us learning the gaps that we still have in our system. It allowed us to learn that most people do not know about our reporting mechanism. They do not know how to report, and if they do know how to report, they do not feel safe to report. It allowed us to learn, more so than I thought before, we do not have the resources, we do not have the capabilities to deal with what is coming to our table. And so in that sense, it was effective, because it allowed us to set a plan of how we can move forward and how we can do better. I think on this, I commend both what FIFA is doing. I commend FIFA for bringing us to the table and allowing us to be a part of this project. The IHF fundamentally supports this project. I also commend the IOC and what the IOC is doing. They're working tirelessly to put in place local systems. However, the IHF believes that these are not mutually exclusive. We must have that international dimension, and we must have that local dimension. And why I say this is the checks and balance. Think about what we saw with RUSADA. If RUSADA would have just been acting locally, and we would have had no one overseeing that, think about what would have went forward. So we need both systems, both international and local, to ensure that we have an effective approach to combating abuse and harassment. And this goes to the resource element. The IHF and most international federations, a few have robust integrity units, and they have the ability, they have 10, 12, 15 investigators. They can deploy them to different parts of the world, and they can accomplish the investigations they need to get done. A majority of the international federations do not have the resources, financial, human, do not have the expertise, and simply cannot provide a trauma-informed approach and safe havens to the victims. So hopefully I answered all of the questions.
Ashley, thank you very much. One thing, first of all, it's very interesting to hear of what you did in the Integrity Awareness Week, but it also underlines to us that we're talking about all sports. I hadn't thought of ice hockey as being one that was also involved, so you're bringing an extra perspective to us. We're grateful to you for that as well, and we'll come back to any questions from my colleagues later. Which brings us to the IOC and Kit McConnell. Kit, Kirsty gave you a sort of hospital pass earlier on, or using a different sport, passed the baton to you in relation to the IOC and your role. So it's up to you to tell us and give us your views generally, but also what you feel about the FIFA's idea of the Safe Sports entity. Welcome, Kit McConnell.
Thank you very much, George. And yes, I come from the sport of rugby, so I'm well familiar with the hospital pass. And thank you, Kirsty, for the one on this occasion. But let me start by thanking the Council of Europe, and officially on behalf of the IOC. It's incredibly important, and we'll come back to this, the spirit of partnership and action. And these meetings are incredibly important to bring us together as sport, but equally us together between public authorities and sport, because we can't do it independently of each other. I think everyone has heard that very clearly in different ways, in different voices this morning, but for us, that is the key moving forward. As you said, George, I'm the IOC Sport Director, and I think the conversation has been incredibly helpful for us this morning. Olivia, Patrice, thank you so much for being so open. It puts not only a human face, but the real experience around this, but in the context of how we move forward. And that's really critical. Equally, and perhaps even more importantly than my role, I'm a father. I've got an 11-year-old daughter and a 9-year-old son. And almost every day of the week, I am putting my two kids, Sophia and Toby, in a sporting environment, trusting that that environment is safe, with coaches, with managers that I personally don't know. And I'm trusting that environment to be safe for my own children. As an organisation, I think many of you are familiar with what we do. We've got a sport organisation, an organisation of Olympic Games that goes back 3,000 years. As an organisation, we're 130 years old. But we know we don't live in the past. You've heard that today. Patrice has said it incredibly clearly. It's about prioritisation from this point forward. There, every single day, we advocate the benefits of sport. Physically, socially, mentally, in terms of the individual and the communities. But clearly, sport is not immune from society, and everything that happens in society happens in sport. The good, and as we've heard this morning, also the bad. We've been active, and Kirsty, with her hospital pass, described this as well. For 20 years now, we've had an active role in this space, and Kirsty highlighted it under the leadership of Prince Faisal from Jordan. We've set up a dedicated in-house unit of 5 people now, specialists, that are driving awareness and change in our own organisation to allow us to then drive awareness and change outside as well. We've set up the first international sport-focused safeguarding officer certification in the last 2 years, and by the end of this year we'll have 150 internationally recognised certificate-holding officers within sports organisations across 66 countries. We're continuing to provide leadership in other areas, noting the way society is changing, online harassment, cyberbullying, these types of issues as well. And to make sure that everything we do is informed by our partners in the international federations, we've conducted a survey across all of the Olympic federations, summer and winter, 40 of them, 46 questions, and we had 100% response from the federations to that, which allows us to move forward with clear information and clear framework. But while we provide the centralised leadership, and coming back to Olivia and Patrice, we know it's not an organisational element alone. Behind every single case of abuse, there's a person. And often it's not just one person, it's a group of people that have suffered in the same way from the same people. And there again, we come back to the point that has been raised. It is about central leadership for us and putting in place local protections and local remedies to protect in the first instance, and where abuse happens, to act. So we have to be leaders in driving that change. In terms of what we're doing, we're very clear that when we say that, that protective environment does not exist for so many athletes, in so many sports, in so many countries. As you've heard, tennis player in South Africa, football player in France, professional football player in many countries, equally exposed. So we have to move forward on this. What we are doing is understanding that, as Alistair and Ashley were very clear in saying, federations themselves, be they international or national, are set up for certain things. They're set up to drive development of their sport, promote their sport, run competitions, increasingly focus on things like anti-doping, but they are not set up as safeguarding bodies in and of themselves. So we have to use the network of sport, but equally provide independent measures to support them and also act where they can't. And we can understand what happens in a national federation. It was raised in the case of Welsh Rugby. Often the people that the complaints are being made against, if that's driven back into a national sports system, those people that are being complained against are often part of that system. The people that are being asked to act on that are either colleagues, they are supporters, they know the people personally, they are not independent in their actions or decision making. And Alistair was very clear also. The mandate of the sport organisation can go so far, but it doesn't go into criminal investigation or criminal action, and that's where we need to find that balance. We had a very clear call, not just from individual federations, but from the umbrella body of all of the Olympic federations, on behalf of all 31 Summer Olympic federations, to the IOC, very clear, very explicit, that the IOC has to act as a leader, working in partnership with the federations who are also driving forward change, but equally acting on behalf and with every single federation, because it cannot just be a sport-specific action here. You cannot be in a situation where you're an athlete lucky enough to be in a sport where there's an active national federation or international federation, but your brother, sister, colleague is in a sport that is not so advanced. It has to be comprehensive. Therefore, acting with the 206 national Olympic committees who act at a national level, the 40 Olympic sports who act at a sport-specific level, we've driven forward a very clear action plan from our side. Do we have all the answers now? Clearly, no. Do we have all the funding now? Clearly, no. But we have a process to get towards practical change. Just a couple of months ago, our IOC Executive Board confirmed that we were starting to accelerate down this road, building on the clear work that FIFA had been done, the IHF had been done. It's not about us versus other sports and what they are doing. It's about bringing everyone together. We've set up a working group, including FIFA and the IHF, including athletes, including 2 athletes who have survived this experience, are bringing that experience directly to the table. And that working group, and it sounds like a very IOC thing, I know, to say we've got a working group and we're looking at it, but it has a very clear mandate. And that's to look at how to centralise and coordinate at a global level, which we are, but also develop models at a local and regional level to have that direct impact, knowing the cultural differences, knowing the legislative differences, knowing there's different partners on the government and criminal sides to work with. So we have to coordinate centrally, drive centrally, but we have to make it impactful at a local level to really make a difference for the athletes. We've got a very clear timeline for that, and that's this year. We have to report back in just over 2 weeks. And there I pass the hospital pass back to Kirsty because she's leading that reporting. But we have to have the model in place this year to drive that forward. We've got $10 million dedicated to that for the next Olympiad, which is a 4-year period building up to each Games. But we know that's a drop in the ocean. And we know we can't fund everything that's going to be effective at a national level. And that's where we come back to the partnership with you. And I think, Alistair, you answered the question, do we know what works? Not entirely. I think we know some elements, but equally we know what doesn't work. And that's where we are now. And we know the prioritization. There were athletes, young athletes, children, that are put in harm's way and suffering abuse yesterday. No doubt there are some suffering that today, and there'll be some tomorrow. And that puts very clearly Patrice's words of prioritization clearly. We, as the IOC, are not just going to put out a statement and a consensus statement at the end of this process. We know we will be judged by action, and it's not about us responding to judgment, it's about us driving change. And there, over the next couple of months, we'll work with the federations directly, with the National Olympic Committees, who can have an impact at a national level, covering all of the sports. And we'll work with them to see how the best way we can do that, creating that model centrally, which may be independent of the IOC, so we're not taking on that responsibility when we're not experts in that ourselves, but setting up models that can be truly effective at a national level. That can be things like this code we talked about, which is a universal reference point for implementation, but also for assessment and measurement. Are people implementing that code, not only in word, but in practice? But we also look to all of you. If we're saying we're committed, we can't do this without you. We have to have partnership inside sport. We have to have partnership with you. You're the ones, as you've heard, that can influence national governments, regional governments, local judicial systems, the people we need to act in addition to sport. So we're committed to that. We've got a very clear timeline. The prioritization is there. We are athlete focused, and we know it's a horrific situation that athletes have been in, and some athletes still are in. So we're completely committed to that as a leader. But leadership on our side alone is not going to work here. We have to be partners in doing that with you and with other government organisations as well. And that's the commitment we've got. And we don't want this to end in 45 minutes or whenever this panel ends. It has to carry on. We can't walk out of this room and say it was a great discussion. A great discussion is not enough here. We have to act, and we have to act collectively. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Kit. And I'm absolutely certain you'll have some questions when we get to that position, particularly with Paris on the horizon. Which brings us now to Simon. Simon was introduced earlier on. I'm going to be the kind of cheeky person you can be when you get to my age in the House of Lords, and say to Simon, in your earlier introduction, you told us what's been happening up till now. In the light of what you've heard, what are you going to recommend back to your ministers and others in the department? And bear in mind, you've got Jane, Amanda, Sally Ann, and Tanya here, and not to mention John Howell, all of whom are very powerful in both houses of Parliament. That's an easy task for you. Over to you, Simon Mason. Simon.
Thanks for that. I think we were talking about hospital passes, so it was very appropriate. But no, I think it's a really important point, and it's been really powerful from our perspective to be part of this discussion. Baroness Sater mentioned the Duty of Care report that DCMS commissioned back in 2016, and I'll add a few more actions that we have taken since that report, which I think are making a real impact on the ground. Last year, the UK government brought in the Positions of Trust legislation, which makes it illegal for sports coaches to have a sexual relationship with someone they coach who is under the age of 18. That brings this into line with the situation for teachers and other social workers as an example. Also, we've recently, through UK Sport, created the Sport Integrity Service, which provides independent support for athletes and people working in Olympic and Paralympic programs to raise concerns. This service carries out investigations on behalf of sports with appropriately skilled personnel. We've also been working through Sport England to support across the wider sports system, and Sport England's recently developed a case management support service, which is focusing on supporting governing bodies about dealing more effectively with instances of safeguarding and abuse at the grassroots level. We also work very closely with partners, including the Child Protection in Sport unit and Sports Resolutions, which was also mentioned earlier, as key bodies in this space who provide vital support to sports organisations, victims and bystanders as part of that process. We're also currently, there is a current call for evidence out on mandatory reporting for a legal duty to report child abuse for people who work with children, which will be a really impactful step forward. That said, I think we also recognise that there is more that we need to do in this space, and that's come across very clearly from the conversation today. And we need to do more to support people across the sports system to ensure that they can participate in a safe way. As government, we recognise the need to work collectively with the sector to support and tackle that challenge. And it's clear to us that a sticking plaster approach simply won't work. And we need to look at the whole system, as others have talked about, to really think about how, from what we've learned from recent issues and recent challenges, as I mentioned earlier, we can improve and think about our future processes in this area. We need to look at the sports sector itself to ensure that it is as welcoming and inclusive as possible. This means increasing diversity and inclusion across the sector and ensuring that the culture of sport is addressed as part of that. We're currently working on a new government sports strategy that will set out our ambitions in this area. Our ministers are very committed to the overall theme around improving integrity of sport, but with a very strong focus on safeguarding and putting safeguarding and improving safeguarding practices at the heart of the UK sports system. So this is a really powerful conversation at a really well-timed position from the UK government perspective for us to land that strategy.
Almost. Bit more later, maybe, under questioning. And now, last but not least, we come to Alexander Hustings. Certainly not least at all, because Alexander is chair of the Enlarged Partial Agreement on Sport, EPAS. The trouble with all these titles, and particularly the acronyms, is you never know how really powerful they can be. And EPAS certainly can be very powerful. You heard Kit, who's sitting next to you, talk about the importance of partnership. That's what you're trying to do in the Council of Europe. Could you bring us up to date and tell us where we are on that and your thoughts generally? Welcome, Alexander.
Thank you for this very, very kind introduction. And I must say that it's a real honor for me to be invited as chair of EPAS to this hearing. I have to say that of all the topics dealt by EPAS, the fight against violence and abuse in sport, particularly towards children and women, but also towards anyone in a vulnerable situation, is one of the most important. It is not in my notes, but I would say that the testimonials we have heard this morning really force us to keep making the fight against abuse and violence towards children a priority on our agenda. At the Council of Europe, the protection of human rights and respect for the rule of law including in sport, is among the strategic priorities. It has been pointed out by Lord Foulkes. EPAS means the Enlarged Partial Agreement on Sport. It is a unique platform for intergovernmental cooperation in the field of sport, created in 2007 to address the main challenges sport is facing. EPAS brings together the public authorities of 41 member states and nearly 30 sport organizations and non-organized organizations that are members of what we call a consultative committee. It is an enlarged agreement. That means that even non-member states of the Council of Europe and even outside of Europe can join it. EPAS aims to promote, through essentially voluntary standards, guidelines, exchange of best practice, tools, and so on, just to promote a sport based on high standards of good governance and ambitious ethical requirements. Protection against all forms of violence and abuse in sport is therefore at the heart of EPAS activities. A groundbreaking standard instrument for us that constitute the Council of Europe, let's say, benchmark for sport, is the European Sport Charter, which was revised recently in 2021. This charter makes many references to the protection of children, whether to ensure better coordination of all the public actors involved or to call on stakeholders to adopt a zero-tolerance policy. A resolution recently adopted by the sport minister of EPAS also reiterates their concern about human rights violations in sport, particularly those against children and women. To combat this violence, the ministers gave to EPAS a mandate to continue to support states and sport organizations in defining and implementing policies to safeguard children. Regarding concrete EPAS actions in the field, I must of course mention several projects. One of them, and I really like it, is Start to Talk, a global project that brings together a multitude of key actors, both coming from the public sectors and from the private sectors, to prevent child abuse in sport and identify how to respond to it. The project offers awareness-raising campaigns, guidelines, roadmaps, training, courses, etc., etc. To date, 9 countries have launched a national Start to Talk campaign. Start to Talk is currently supporting countries to develop roadmaps for the implementation of a child safeguard policy in sport, which constitutes the road for even setting up a safeguarding of officer roles in sport. The roadmap is based on a project called Child Safeguarding in Sport. This is a joint project that has been co-financed by the European Union. A pool of international experts on safe sport has also been set up. This pool is a single point of access to multidisciplinary expertise, gathering together researchers, policymakers, specialists, etc., covering all forms of violence and abuse against children in sport. I want to underline that each of these projects brings together public authorities, sport organizations, NGOs, researchers, and practitioners in steering committees. For instance, the steering committee of Start to Talk brings together many national authorities. I mean, people from the education sector, from social affairs, from sport, etc., etc., including many representatives from national sport organizations and international sport organizations, including representatives of parents, including victims and survivors, including child protection agencies, etc. So all the key actors are put together in order to develop an horizontal, multi-sectoral and multidisciplinary approach to make initiatives and actions more effective than isolated actions. I would like also to mention briefly and very quickly some general conventions of Europe. Although they do not directly target the topic of sport, they also can be applied to this field, to this specific field. These include Convention on Combating the Sexual Exploitation and Abuse of Children, Trafficking in Human Beings, Violence Against Women and Domestic Violence, etc., etc. I could also mention a recommendation adopted by the Committee of Ministers in 2009 on integrated national strategies for the protection of children against violence, which states, and I would like to quote it, "It is the responsibility of the state to foster a culture of children's rights and a sense of responsibility towards children among all professionals who come into contact with them." Sport organizations have also an obligation to protect and to promote and to respect human rights, especially for those who are the most vulnerable. EPA's actions, EPA's projects, in fact, they are just simply transforming the principle in really concrete actions in the field, on the field. As you can see, on the basis of the standards, many references, framework, guidelines, and tools have been developed by EPAS. It is now up to the various stakeholders to take them and implement them with the support of EPAS. Maybe I should even mention diverse initiatives regarding trans and LGBT athletes, some workshops, seminars, etc., etc. And maybe to conclude, we should recall that Council of Europe also signed some memoranda of understanding with FIFA and UEFA, in particular to continue cooperation on the protection of children's rights. As the Council of Europe, we are also collaborating on the development of the FIFA Guardians program from FIFA. And the Council of Europe, it has been mentioned, is also involved in FIFA's project to establish an independent global body to investigate and follow up cases of abuse. So as you see, the topic of child protection in sport is becoming increasingly important, both in public debate and in practice. Therefore, and this project has also already been mentioned by the representative of IOC, I can only welcome this initiative to allocate a fund of $10 million per Olympic cycle to strengthen the prevention and monitoring the cases of abuse in sport. So, and just to conclude, as you can see, I think that EPAS as a specific platform gathering a diversity of actors coming from the public sector and from the private sector is really a unique platform to contribute to fight against the violence against children in sport. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Now, the opportunity is there for you to put questions to one or all of the panelists, and I'm going to ask them, I'm going to give them the opportunity as we get towards the end, in about half an hour's time or so, to sum up, so that they'll all have an opportunity to get in a final word, even if they don't have questions to answer. Inka, would you like to start?
I can, yes. Thank you for all the speakers. I have one question which is somehow related to the violence in sports. We had the Ice Hockey World Championship just 1 week ago in Finland, in Tampere, and this discussion began when the people were watching the matches. And there is a lot of violence in the rink, what you see. And also Patrice mentioned that the sport culture is very masculine. Do you see that this culture, that these kind of different laws that there are existing, boxing is for a good example, that those are existing there in the rink, do they also affect what is happening outside of the match or the rink? And do you see that this culture also changing to be not so masculine anymore? Because many times the sport organizations, they defend that we can have our own laws when we are playing, and then after match, we follow the normal laws. Do you get my point?
That's a very interesting question. Ashley?
Yeah, so I definitely think that the ice hockey, the sport itself, creates the culture that I previously mentioned. Like this very masculine, very dominating culture. I think that we're starting to see that a little bit change, but I think that that's because we're seeing players that are starting to speak out, both male players that are very influential within our sport, but also female players are standing up and not allowing the type of behavior that we've historically seen. But I absolutely agree that the inherentness of ice hockey, it's a very physical sport. It's a very tough sport. If you do not understand the sport and you watch it for the first time, you would think that police need to come in and arrest half the players, to be honest. But in that you will see that go outside of the ice rink. But this is something that we're working on to change, that we want our players to be tough and feel they can be tough on the ice, but what should not occur off the ice should have any transition between that. So that's what we're working on to change. But it definitely historically has been the case.
Thanks, Ashley. Chris?
Thank you, George. I thank you to all the speakers. It was a fantastic discussion this morning. My question is more related to the practical side of things. When it comes to sports integrity, the most difficult thing to achieve is getting people to talk for many reasons, mostly fear. As we have heard, Patrice spoke about his issue when he was 38. And there's also the fear of not being believed, as Olivia pointed out. My question is, because the law and enforcement can only intervene, unfortunately, after things have happened. What do we do together as governments, as parliamentarians, as sports governing bodies, to get victims to talk at the right moment, not 20 years, 25 years later?
Good question. I'll take two more and then come back to members of the panel. Amanda.
I just wanted to pick up something that Simon mentioned, that Baroness Gray-Thompson's report, things have been action from it, and that's a really positive step, and the government's been doing that. And you raised the integrity service, the sports integrity service, as well as one of those points. We've talked about the governing bodies and who holds them to account. In her report, she mentioned the possibility of having an independent ombudsman. Have you had more thoughts about that?
Sorry, that's one question. We'll come back to Simon later. Kim?
Yes. Yes, I've written a lot of reports in my life, and some of the reports, they landed on a shelf somewhere with dust on it. I don't want this report to be like that. I want it to be used. And before it gets used by people, I think we have to be very focused on what is important in this. That's why I asked the question about best practice. I think I hear a lot of good words from you. I hear a lot of good testaments. But do you talk together in any level? Do you ask questions to each other? And do you have any kind of interactions? And what do you actually do to get all the wise words to the locals that really decide what happens? So I hear that we can use the criminal court to make change. I don't want to do that. I want to make change for real in people. So how do we do that?
Shall we do reverse order? Did you all know each other before you came along here today?
I didn't know you.
Ah, well, that's true. Did you know Alistair, though?
Yeah, maybe if I start on that in reverse order of the questions, as you say. Look, I think within sport there's a couple of levels of dialogue. Clearly, organisationally, we work closely together on a range of matters. Yes. Equally, on this point, I think it's been driven bottom up a little bit with either experts or the dedicated people like Ashley in ice hockey working together in terms of moving forward. FIFA played integral part in driving that communication between federations. Ice hockey partnered with FIFA in that regard. Now, we as the IOC are not replacing that, but being in parallel with that, bringing in others. As I said, we've done that communication with all of the international federations now. We had a working session with all of the federations in the same room, sharing best practice and issues, clearly. Now we're moving into that phase of codifying that, putting a structure around that, testing the partnerships so we're not acting in isolation, and sharing that across the Olympic movement to drive that down. But again, it can't be us operating in isolation, and it's not just about the international federations if we put it into context. I come back to an example where we may have FIFA and the ice hockey being very proactive in this and driving that down to every one of their national federations, over 200 in the case of FIFA. But again, if not every international federation is doing that, you're going to end up with inconsistency at a national level between those lucky enough to be involved in a sport where there's an international federation driving that change and others in a sport where that's not happening. And they're ending up in very different environments. And that's where the national level, through governments and also national Olympic committees, are critical to drive at a national level that consistency, both in terms of structures, codes, which we can help coordinate and set a best practice for clearly, and ensure those are implemented and act where they are not. And that act can be things like funding, recognition, and other forms of action. So it's not just done within the sport internationally or nationally. So there, coming back to your point, George, have we talked about this? Yes. Do we need to talk about this more? Clearly. And we need to have a structure for that discussion, building on the work done by some of the federations alongside me.
Ashley?
Yeah, I can just follow up on that, and I fully agree with what Kit said. The reality is I think that abuse and harassment in these topics are just behind. So WADA, we have structures in place for other integrity topics and other topics that we discuss in sport, and all federations cooperate all the time. The IHF is a huge proponent of not recreating the wheel. So if I know a federation is done, I'm going to call them, I'm going to talk to them and see how to do it. I think the reality is in this particular topic, we're starting those conversations. Should have been done 5 years ago, it should have been done a long time ago, but we are starting those conversations. When FIFA brought the IHF into the product, when we met with the IOC, so we are starting them, and we definitely talk to reach the best result.
Alistair?
Yeah, thanks. The discussions are ongoing. We do speak to each other. I think it's fair to say, as this meeting today confirms, it's a difficult topic, and there are different shades of opinion on how it might best be tackled. But if I could sort of relate that point to the question asked by Chris, which is, I think, a central part, which is how do you get athletes to come forward and speak? I think the only way you can do that is by building institutions which they trust, right? They don't trust the current system, they don't have confidence in it, and personally, I don't blame them, right? So you need to have something more robust, something more independent, something more credible. And I think the practical purpose of the discussion today would be to see if there is a practical means of setting up such a better monitoring enforcement mechanism. And I think it probably needs to be global for the reasons I mentioned earlier.
Patrice, do you want to, particularly on how do we get victims to talk?
This is a really hard question. Because personally, even my own mother, when I say I'm going to put it in my books, she say, please don't do it. So even your own parents, they don't want you to talk about it. And I say, Mom, it's not about me. I've been successful in my life. It's about billions of children. But like Alasdair just said, it's about trust. And the problem, we don't trust the institution. And also, I just want to, because I made some note when everyone was talking, and Kim, you described us as an expert. Personally, I am not an expert. I am a survivor, and I'm just sharing my experience. So when people say what we should do, I'm like, what you should do, guys. You have to come with the strategy, and if we share the same value and the same determination, because what you just say, Kim, is really important, are we really want to make a change? Because if we want, we can do it. I am an example. I grew up in the street. At the age of 13, I was begging money just to buy a sandwich. I've not been to any academy football club, and I make it to the biggest club in the world and win more than 21 trophies. So with determination, we can. Sorry. But I am a leader. I am a leader. And Sir Alex Ferguson, why he gave me that armband? I'm just a French guy, and he was many English player and even Scottish player. But because I know to create other leader, that's the way, the definition of a real leadership. It's not about yourself, it's to make sure you create other leader around yourself. And also I would like us to stop pointing any institution, saying why FIFA doesn't do that, why UEFA doesn't do that. They're doing already a massive job, but we have to all work together. Like as they say, we can talk hours and we won't find a solution today. If we find a solution today, I will call all of us genius. And I don't think we are. But we have a heart. And we can change things. And, you know, the FIFA thinks we can always change things. They did a lot of campaign. I give the example about against the racism. And I never wanted to be part of it because the player, we just like put some like important player and just saying, say no to racism, say no to, I see players doing that, but they go home after, they don't care about it. So we need also to pick the right people. The people want to make a change, not just those people because they have massive followers or because they're famous. We need to people, they understand the subject. Me personally, it's not because I experience, you know, sexual violence. And also I want us to stop just saying sexual violence, any kind of violence, physically, online, emotional, any kind of violence. This is really, really important. And for example, as an African person, just talking about love is taboo. I never see my parents kissing each other. I never see them hugging them. So it's really difficult to talk. So imagine saying to my parents and my dad who say he won't believe me. I think the first reaction will be violent. It will be violent because it's taboo. We don't talk about those things. So that's the solution also. We need, after this meeting, going home and digest, because we won't find a solution in one day. And if we not prioritize this subject, this matter, I call it as a crime. I know I keep repeating prioritize, but if we don't do it, I qualified it as a crime. And do you know every children, when they experience any kind of violence, they will end up violent, drug addict, alcoholic. So that's why I'm like, these children are the future. I repeat myself, we're talking about a lot of campaign, saving the environment, but if we don't tackle the matter at the beginning, at the source, education is the key. So, yes, that's my, I just want to say a massive thank you. I really mean it to be here with all of you, with the panel, with all of you. I'm confident. I'm confident we will do something together. And yeah, the future looks bright. I don't want people, when they come out of this room, being sad or, no, I want people to be happy and determined and make sure we act. Because I think if we react, it's already too late. We need to act.
I'll come back to that in a minute, Patrice. Thank you very much. But let Simon answer the question that Amanda put about the Ombudsman, I think, was it?
Yeah, very happy to come back on that. So I think our view is that an ombudsman in and of itself isn't the answer to the question. There is the fundamental question of what policies, processes, practices is any organisation looking at to try and deal with this issue more effectively. As I touched on, a number of actions have been taking place since the Duty of Care report, creating and looking at the UK sports system to improve integrity in the round. What we're doing now through our new strategy is recognising that we need to do more and go further, but that we need to work out exactly what works within the context of the UK sports system and some of the specific unique elements of that. That said, we also need to look internationally and work with counterparts around what type of processes are being built and different bodies are being developed that look at these kind of issues collectively. I think what's come across really clearly today, and it is really clear through all the evidence that we've gathered through this process, is the importance of independence in this process. So our view on the Ombudsman question almost is we need to bottom out exactly what any type of organisation would do to then define exactly how you take that forward if it is the right thing to do.
Time's beginning to run away with us. We'll have 3 more questions in a minute. But before that, Patrice said, go home and do something. Now, one of my concerns about the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe is that we turn up in lovely places, and London, and sit round a table, and discuss things and say, yes, we must do that. And then we go back to our capitals and don't follow it up. And that's why John Howell has set us a task in the United Kingdom by putting down parliamentary questions. All of you, I hope, will give a commitment from today to all the people who've spoken to us to go back and follow it up, discuss it with ministers, discuss it with colleagues, ask questions, discuss it with sports associations, see what you can do, so that when we get back together again at our next meeting, we can have a report back. So please do that in honour and thanks to our speakers. Now, three or four more questions. Jane, first.
Thank you very much, George. I'm Jane Stevenson. I'm a member of the Sports Select Committee in the UK and a proud Wolverhampton Wanderers fan. I do lots of work with their foundation. My question is about how we educate people. I think Fiona alluded to it earlier. Children entering academies, what role the sporting body has in educating children and their parents who are putting them under the care of a sort of academy or a sporting body. And in different sports that will be different as far as what the UK is doing. I'm wondering if we can find out if any other country that delegates have come from has models that they're looking into that would be comparable. I think that information would be of interest to our sort of deliberations. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you for the floor. David Smoliak from Czech Republic. I have probably no question, but one short remark. What I consider to be important experience from our country, we have very similar cases of abusing young sportsmen in our country. It was not about sexual abusing, but emotional abusing. And what was very difficult was that the coaches who were responsible for that were very successful, and they bring medals from championships, and the representative of sports unions closed their eyes because they didn't want to damage their sport and the success. And I think it's the main problem because in current time our priority is succeed, to win. And I think that we must change this priority because my attitude is that most important thing is to have a good sport environment. And if we wouldn't change our priority and our attitude, it will be very difficult to change anything. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Sally Ann, is it? Yes, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Just picking up on several of the speakers today on prevention and education and the importance of, when you put your children in a grassroots sports group, children's group, and you're sort of leaving them in the trust. So really, my comment or query is that education, so primary schools play a big role in highlighting to children and to parents the issues that might arise. So we can't sort of pull a veil over it. The reality is that children might be at risk in these sports groups. So maybe there's more of a role in schools. In schools we have safeguarding leads in the UK. So there may well be something that could be done across sports and schools in terms of the safeguarding there. That's just something to put in the mix.
Thank you very much. Now, I'll give anyone on the panel who wants to, don't feel obliged to, but if you'd like to, make a final point, answering those 3 questions or any additional points. Alexandra, do you have anything you'd like to say finally? No?
Yeah, let's say yes, very, very quickly. I think that one of the problems we have to face as well is denying the existence of the problem. This is really something we have to face. We know about that. I'm also in contact with many governments, and I work for one of them as well. It is just to put the problem on the public space. That's a problem. And it is very, very difficult. We could discuss for hours for the reason for that. There are it is a sensitive topic. You already mentioned it. There are many other priorities. You know, we attend a meeting on good governance, then therefore the good governance in sport is the main priority. Then we go to another one talking about sustainability of sport. The main priority is then the sustainability. And then you go to another one regarding the match fixing in sport. And then match fixing is the main priority as well. But what we did many years ago in doping, in the fight against doping, could be taken as well as a kind of model. We have elaborated many, many things, and we invested many resources in the fight against doping as well. One of them is, for example, some really good whistle-blowing system, just to protect the whistleblowers. And if you are a bit involved in anti-doping, you can go to many anti-doping, national anti-doping organization websites, and you will see a special box dedicated to denounce some anonymously the cases of doping you have heard, you have seen, or involved into it. So there are things that maybe we should copy-paste, just not to reinvent the wheel. And that's also the advantage, and sorry for once again advocating what we do in EPAS, but people from EPAS are also involved in match fixing. They are also involved in anti-doping. They are also involved because they follow the International Convention on the Violence in Stadium. We are also involved in violence. We gather many, many stakeholders coming from different sectors. And maybe once again, this is maybe the main advantage of EPAS, just to avoid isolated actions. We saw in the past many people, many organizations doing very interesting things, but they were isolated. And we all know that violence in sport, abuse in sport, is a cross-border problem. It's an international issue. It has been said by other people. So that means that we need a greater integration and a greater cooperation. And the advantage of EPAS, once again, sorry for emphasizing EPAS and what we do, but the advantage is that it may, let's say, overlap the main issue the public authorities are facing when discussing with the sport organization. We all know that sport organizations really care about their autonomy of sport. And on the other side, coming from the public authorities, we know that our action is most of the time limited, sorry for using the EU bubble word, but we are limited to subsidiarity. We say, okay, we will finance the sport organization, but let's say that this is the limit of our action. And the advantage of this cooperation, this platform of cooperation, is that at the end, and I cross my finger, we can make a kind of co-creation of useful actions. Thank you, Mr.
Thanks, Alexander. Kit, a minute?
Yes, thank you. I think just 2 points from my side. One, and George, you mentioned the interrelationship and it's centering around human rights. And I think the connection point we have in all of this is that the human right is not only to practice sport, it's to practice sport in an environment free from harm. And we have a collective responsibility in that space which bridges any potential gaps between public authorities and sport if I could say one thing at the end, George, it would be, again, this can't be the end of it. And as we take the journey over the coming months, we don't want to just report back to you about what we're doing, but I think everyone has said that coordination is fundamental, and we go on that journey together, because that's the only way we're going to be effective centrally, and it's the only way we're going to stop these cases happening at a local level and act when they do. So if we could pick up some type of coordination moving forward, that would be fantastic and hugely appreciated from our side. Thank you.
Thanks, Kit. Ashley?
Yes, I would just like to take this opportunity to comment on two of the last comments. This is definitely something that we are fully aware of in ice hockey with respect to this when at all cost. The IHF has a 5- and 10-year plan to approach this. We have developed and are in the development of a coaching curriculum where we will educate players mandatory through their coaching life to try to change their approach to how they coach. This is more focused on those new coaches coming in. And then we want to ensure that there are effective rules in our countries, because many times we have seen that coaches have gotten out of cases because the rules were not clearly defined and they were able to find loopholes. So we are working to ensure that not only our rules do not allow for this, but also our federation rules do not allow for this, so that those bad actors that we just cannot change through education, we're able to remove them and create a deterring effect for in the ice hockey ecosystem. With respect to the comment on education and in the school system, one thing WADA advocates for, and I fundamentally agree with, is their education model of playground to podium. We need to educate kids younger, so that we have to educate them, we have to instill these values, so that when we go and tell them something's wrong, it's like books on a shelf. Oh yeah, that's obvious. We don't have to convince coaches, we don't have to convince players that this is bad. And then lastly, I think that we have to force those sports who have not started, force those governments who have not started, and encourage those sports who have and those governments who have to continue to have these difficult and uncomfortable conversations. We need to get our sports and our leaders of sports and our leaders of governments to stop, listen, stand up, and take action, and do not let anything get in the way of stopping what I think is the biggest threat to sport we will ever face.
Thank you, Ashley. Alistair?
Thanks, George. Yeah, just briefly, I mean, there are a number of common themes, it seems to me, in terms of not just the discussion today, but the historic cases, and its kind of cover-ups, lack of political will to deal with the issue, failure to take victims seriously, lack of confidence of victims or survivors in the system. I mean, these are things that seem to be almost universal, not unique to any particular sport or any particular geography. So the issue would be whether it's possible to distill these problems into some kind of coherent table and take steps to try to address them with institutions that are fit for purpose, and in particular that athletes and children have confidence in and trust. I mean, it seems to me that's the key to it. And of course it's complicated, of course it involves expense, but this is a question of whether the sports world does see it as a priority. If it does, then I think this is what it needs to do.
Thank you, Alistair. Patrice, a final word? You had 3 or 4.
No, I think I already talked too much. But to answer also to David and to all the course, winning all the course. I play more than 700 professional football games. But if you ask me how many of them I play, I was like 100% fit, I would say probably maybe 5. So this is just like receiving a knock or whatever. And when you go to a president of a football club and you tell him about the violence, his first reaction will be, they are not baby. They are not baby. We are not here to babysit them. And that's the massive problem. Like they just don't want to talk about it. Like they push it away straight away. I remember when I was playing for West Ham and a person was coming and talking about discrimination, about the LGBTQ. And many players, they were like, oh, if a player is gay, he needs to leave this room or whatever. So I let them talk. And I couldn't believe in 2020, back in the day, we still like judging people. People don't feel safe. They won't talk about that. But they were like coming to me and telling me, Patrice, you can see because my mom educated me to not judge people. and accept people who they are. I just finish with that.
Olivia, final word?
Yeah, just very quickly. So, you know, I'm going to, oh God.
It's okay, I'm here for you.
I'm going to refer to the, you know, the anti-doping. There's huge disincentive to dope. So let's lead by example, and let's disincentivize abusers to abuse, and let's find a way to incentivize the abused to come forward. And that's pretty simple. That's just by gaining their trust. Lead by example. Make an example of the people who are abusing and who are not taking this seriously, and that'll hopefully sort of set the ball rolling and set the ball in motion. But the net needs to get smaller. It really, really does. And it's up to us to do it. So it has to, as I've got printed on the back of my T-shirt, it ends with me. And I think that's something we should all take into heart.
Thank you, Olivia, and it's going to end with you because we now need to bring this session to an end. Before doing so, can I, sometimes these hearings seem like talking shops. I feel this one hasn't been like that. I feel this one has been a really effective working meeting, and I feel that on both sides, all sides, not both, all sides, we're going to follow it up. And that is due, first of all, to our Secretariat for inviting such excellent people for both panels, and to both panels for being so good and so cooperative. And I'd like to thank them all very much indeed.
Indeed, it was a very touching panel, I would say, because the word interesting would not describe. I think all of us received this energy that you gave us to make a difference when we go back to our capitals. And before we go for lunch, I suggest first we would take a family picture, family photo with the panelists and the rapporteur and those who moderated. Thank you for moderation. And then we'd all join all the committee for the big family picture. I hope we will make it in one scene. So probably it's better to go that way. So the light would be on our faces.